My name is Sutherland, and I am the founder and executive director of the Gayle Wells Foundation for Early Onset Alzheimer's and Care. Gayle Wells was an exceptional human being. I was blessed enough to know Gayle when I applied for a job with an attorney in the building that she managed in 1985. I got the job, and by 1987 we were just inseparable. She was my person, and I think I was her person as well. Gayle passed away at the age of 66 from early onset Alzheimer's disease. In 2001, Gayle was diagnosed with breast cancer. At that time, we would have no idea what lied ahead of us, but it was 10 years of consistent medical issues. She went through chemo, 6 months of chemo, did extremely well, and we thought everything was good. And in 2005, she started losing quite a bit of weight, and we received her third cancer diagnosis of thyroid cancer. So she underwent thyroid cancer treatment in 2006 with removal of her thyroid, followed by radioactive iodine treatments, and came through that very well. So, as is typical protocol with breast cancer patients, she had been on tamoxifen, had had some side effects, and she was put on a new pill called Arimidex. And we started noticing some memory issues. Sadly, the memory issues didn't get better, and with Gayle it started as communication issues. She would start to talk and would lose her train of thought. She would begin struggling as far as paying bills. It was never not recognizing who people were or forgetting who she was. It was more executive functioning tasks. At this time, we spoke to doctors. They thought once she got off the medication it would get better, and in 2009, at the age of 64, we were recommended to go in for neuropsychological testing. Within 10 minutes of the interviews that the doctors were doing with me, I knew what we were looking at. 2 weeks later, we were called into the doctor's office. They took Gayle in a treatment room. The doctor pulled me off to the side, never spoke one word, but pointed at the report, which said mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease, and at that point I knew my life would never be the same. So at this point I was working out of the house with Gayle, and I was able to be there with her 24/7. And it was just a steady progression of watching her fight so hard to do just the most simple tasks. In 2011, everything really started to change, and the progression was so rapid. And actually back in 2010, when we went to see a neurologist, I was handed a second prescription for one of the Alzheimer's medications, and the neurologist said to me, "Good luck, this will go fast." No referrals to resources. I had no information on what to expect of what was going to happen to Gayle, which was such a difference from what we had grown to expect and we were provided with when we were patients at MD Anderson. The difference of being diagnosed with cancer versus the diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's was just drastic. So I bought every book I could possibly find on Alzheimer's disease, but sadly very few of them ever addressed early onset, which by definition is a diagnosis under the age of 65 years old. She was 64 at time of diagnosis, but when I go back into medical records, which I have all of her medical records, which is these 3 volumes of notebooks. Gayle was about 58 years old, 59 years old when we first started noticing the communication issues. There was nothing, and not just for me as the caregiver, but for Gayle as the individual who was battling every single day against this disease. Gayle owned her own office building of attorneys, but yet it was still a very expensive situation of being able to keep her under her insurance until she was able to qualify for Medicare. Had we not been able to do that, I don't know what we would have done. As we were processing through all of this, and I kept realizing how little there was for people under the age of 65, in the back of my mind, an idea started to form. And I just kind of kept it there safe and tucked away as I was caring for Gayle 24/7, being in the home. By summer of 2011, we live off of a very busy intersection in Houston There was something that snapped with her that evening, which later I learned was delirium. That was a term that had never been explained to me or defined for me. Gayle all of a sudden did not know who I was, walked out of our home into one of the busiest intersections in the city of Houston. The only thing I can think of is that angels were around her, because at 6 o'clock on a Wednesday night, not one car came zooming towards her, as is a common occurrence on that street every minute of every day. We were able to, after about 6 hours, get her to settle down. 2 days later, we found ourselves back in the same position, and I had no option other than to call 911 and have her admitted to one of Houston's premier hospitals. The situations that arose with her in the ER department found her strapped to the bed, where she was not even provided the basic courtesy of being allowed to go to the restroom, to eat, or be given liquids. The next morning, she had not been allowed to go to the restroom all night long, and we found her still tied to the bed. I was able to take her to the restroom, but of course an accident ensued on the way. And by that afternoon, I was being told that she was being transferred to a psych hospital, and I couldn't understand why that was happening. She wasn't being sent to a hospital where they had a unit to help people that were battling different dementias or other, brain diseases. But instead, she was escorted by a deputy because I learned she was being admitted on a mental health warrant, and she was sent to a psych hospital. I was not allowed to see her, and when I went back that night and demanded to see her and that I wasn't leaving until I did, I was informed that when she woke up, she got up out of bed and fell, and basically she had a knot on the back of her head that ran from the top of her head all the way down to her neck. I was blessed enough to have 2 social workers working with me that were fighting to get Gayle into a unit at one of our local hospitals here in Houston, and finally by that evening we were able to do so. I thought that peace was in sight, and sadly, as we entered the emergency room, we soon learned that the treatment of Gayle and of us as her caregivers continued to deteriorate. She was grabbed under the arm where she'd had a mastectomy and reconstruction and yanked up on the bed. She was hit in the leg with a wheelchair. We were locked in the treatment room. I was told that you never give Alzheimer's patients fluids or an IV. She was highly dehydrated. By this time, you're so exhausted as the caregiver, and you just don't know what else there is to say or how you can continue to fight. Eventually, Gayle was admitted to the hospital that weekend, and from there, her care was exceptional. She was treated the way she should have been treated from the minute she went into the first hospital, and the explanation for her delirium was given to me that her medications of being on Synthroid, since her thyroid had been removed, and the medication she was on for Alzheimer's disease had kind of counteracted with each other, and her body was not absorbing the Synthroid. I was also told that she would never come back home, which at that point I knew, and I was told that she needed to be in a facility where there were 3 shifts, 24/7. Gayle continued to be in the hospital system for 2.5 weeks while they got her medications regulated. She was wheelchair bound, didn't really ever know if she would get up and walk again. But even in that setting, knowing and being able to advocate for her and explain to the staff who she was as an individual made all the difference in her care. Gayle loves and loved animals. Didn't matter what kind they were, didn't matter how many they were, the more the merrier. But she called them her babies. And she was strapped in a wheelchair, and she was constantly leaning over in her wheelchair and doing and saying, come on. Well, they looked at her leaning forward in her wheelchair as though she was trying to get out of the wheelchair. When I explained to the nursing staff that she was calling her babies, meaning puppies and kittens, the treatment of her, it was a 360-degree circle. They then started giving me menus and letting me pick whatever she'd like to eat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I mean, she was just treated with such kindness and love and compassion, whereas prior to understanding what she was doing, she was being treated as an aggressive, non-compliant patient. If you're sitting there at home and you are caring for a loved one, please speak up. You know your loved one better than anyone else, and make them listen and let them know what your loved one is trying to communicate, because it can make all the difference in the care that they're receiving. So as we transitioned through that, Gayle was admitted to a memory care facility where she continued to deteriorate rapidly, and 8 weeks after her admission into the memory care facility, Gayle passed away at the age of 66 from early onset Alzheimer's disease. As I went through that, I knew what the mission was, and that was to create the Gayle Wells Foundation, where we would focus solely on providing education and resources and care and love and comfort and acceptance to anybody that was living with this disease and their caregivers and their immediate circle of support. We have done that, and what I have done is I went back, I did get my master's in social work from the University of Houston. So that would provide us with the education and knowledge base to really be able to provide the services that we need to provide. But the one thing I did learn, and Gayle taught me so many lessons when she was on this earth, but she continues to teach me lessons after her death, and that is that the person living with this disease, they are still in there. So many times people are dismissive and say they're not there anymore, or they don't know what's going on. Gayle always knew. She knew when people came to see her. She might not recall their name, but she could always recall something that made everybody know she knew exactly who they were. She had an awareness at the end of her life of what was happening with her. And the doors that have opened and the people that have come into my path, this is exactly where we need to be. The core values that we have developed for this foundation, which you're able to find on our website at gaylewells.org, are absolutely the way that Gayle lived her life. And so while we have a name attached to this foundation, it's important to remember it's not just an entity. This was a person who lived an exceptional life, who provided exceptional, unconditional love to everyone she met, whether you were human or animal. Gayle welcomed everybody, and that's what we're going to do with this foundation. Please sign up on our website so that you can stay updated about where we are in your community. We are working to provide services and standards of care that can be implemented in any location in the United States, and we really would love to hear from you. So thank you so much, and we will see you again soon.